Back for another UNLV All Access podcast. UNLV football will be the focus here. 55 days away from opening kickoff. Yes, just 55 days away from opening kickoff against Bryant on September 2nd at Allegiant Stadium. Get your tickets at unlvtickets.com. It's Cofield, along with the former UNLV quarterback and budding radio star, Caleb Herring, is with us. What's up, buddy?
Oh man, I'm good. It seems crazy. 55 days away. Like I feel like that's creeping up on us fast. Like seems like not that long ago we were talking about spring ball, and now it's like seasons right around the corner for both pros and UNLV football. It's exciting,
Yep.
man.
Well, for me, I'm excited for the football season. I'm excited to see this new look coaching staff and Barry Odom and man, all the new players. It just seems like on the surface when you bring in 40 plus new players that, yeah, you did some of the work in the spring and a little bit when guys reported. My God, there's so much to get done once they really get to work in late July. As a former player, what's your view of trying to mix in 40 plus guys? And I would say, probably 15, 18, like have to be somewhere in the ones and twos. That is not a lot of time to get ready for a football season. And by the way, the maturation and the development doesn't stop with September 2nd. It's going to be one of those things that I would tell the players, and I'm sure the coaches have, like, if you're not in the ones and twos and getting playing time week 1, week 2, this is a war of attrition, and you learn throughout the season. So we've seen in recent seasons, players came from, way back in the pack on the depth chart to actually get playing time. You just got to keep working.
Yeah, it might be the case where, some of the guys we see early in the season or who are at the top of the depth chart early in the season, it's more a matter of knowledge of the playbook and comfortability with the play calls than it is about their actual skill set. So you might see guys that are ones and twos to start that don't end up at the end of the season in the top two on the depth chart, just because the guys that learn the system now get a chance to maybe surpass them, show some more in practice. Also, to that note, it might be the case where the playbook doesn't look the same. Like there might be a watered down version of the playbook, depending on how much the guys grasp in the fall. But, going back to what we saw in the spring to what we're going to see, during fall camp, there's going to be additions and, I guess, an evolution of the playbook based on what the players understand and what they're able to grasp. So there's going to be a lot that changes, not just on the depth chart, but as far as what the coaches are comfortable calling on game day. Because just be honest, the last thing a coach wants is to put guys out there or call a play that the team's not completely comfortable running, right? Like that's like on a Saturday in front of the, in the big lights in competition, you don't get a do-over. It's not like you get to try that rep again, like a practice in a controlled situation, which is all they've had so far. So come the season, they might not be comfortable calling all of the complicated things down the road, especially with this new offense, this go-go offense. It's going to be, it's going to be really fast-paced learning in the fall to see and make sure that guys understand what they're getting into or that they're comfortable on the field running the things. And the depth chart's going to change dramatically, even from what we saw in the spring to what we saw now, just with the transfers coming in, more competition at basically every position on the field. And those guys are going to get a chance in the fall. Now, you don't want to slow down your learning or your install pace just to get a guy a chance, but everybody that's come in new in the fall will get a chance to show their worth. And I think what's important about this, when we talk about 40 guys, 40 new players to the program, what's important about today's game, and I think this is kind of to help with the transfer portal and how crazy that's been, is the coaches having that time in the summer to be hands-on with the players. It doesn't seem like much, but it's a few hours a week that they're able to actually be on the field and coach with the players in their individual position groups. Those hours go a long way when you talk about the kind of turnover and overhaul on a roster that UNLV is undergoing. And that, a lot of teams now under the country is becoming a trend. It's becoming the norm now, where this kind of roster overhaul is just what happens during the offseason. So those summer hours are going to be clutch to get those guys a head start. So getting here in the summer, I think 30 new guys came in the summer, moved into the dorms, and were able to get those hours. They'll hit the ground running in the fall, hopefully have a lot of the playbook under their belt. But there's going to be more to add. And whoever gets on that learning curve the quickest, I think will get the most minutes to start the season.
Cornell Ford is in on Barry Odom's staff as the running backs coach, and they go back to days at Missouri, and Cornell was at Toledo. That's his alma mater the last couple of years. So he walks into a relatively new running back room. And, here's the deal on a lot of these rooms and the changes. They made a judgment on a lot of the players before the spring, and those players moved on. Clearly, they used the spring as another time for analysis, and 20-plus dudes moved on after the spring, and that included a lot of running backs. And there weren't running backs who were getting a lot of time, but they still had upside. On our broadcast crew, one of our guys, Russ, loves Sammy Green, so Sammy Green has moved on. Spencer Briggs was a really good special teams player. He moved on. Chad Magyar had one more year available, and had some moments at running back. As a big downhill guy and a guy who catches the ball to the backfield. He moved on, also a good special teamer. So they brought in a bunch of new running backs, and we're going to hear from Cornell Ford in a couple of bites during the show today. And I'm glad you mentioned that this is football in 2023. One of the questions I asked Cornell Ford was, just adjusting. He's been around for a long time, and that as a coach, you're always coaching because you're getting new players all the time. It's really interesting right now how college football is working, and all the coaches have to be on point, and they have to be working with these dudes to get them up to speed. The interesting thing here is because of a new staff, they're learning a new offense, and it's a two-back offense, this go-go offense. And I just wonder, from what you've seen, I know you've watched some tape on Brennan Marion, the offensive coordinator, what he's run in the past. Is this a complicated offense for the running backs?
I think it has the ability to be, because it does break a lot of the traditional rules, right? When you have two running backs in the backfield that are not, it's not a halfback and a fullback. It's two halfbacks. Both have the ability to take the ball and carry it. Both have the ability to be the same threat out of the backfield in the passing game. And then you still have all the responsibilities of a blocking running back when it is your turn to stay in there and be a part of the protection. So it's one of those things that's it has the potential to be, right. I'm not sure the language that they're speaking or what they're calling each of the running backs and how do you know which one's getting the ball this time around? But there is the opportunity for some confusion. Anytime you add more backfield action, right? Like if there's play actions or first guy through, second guy through actions in the backfield with the quarterback, there's a need for more communication, I think, and a deeper understanding of the total offense. So there's a chance for it to be confusing. But I don't think that's the intent. I don't think it's a wordy offense. I don't think it's intended to be overly complicated from the offensive standpoint, maybe to break the rules on the defense, maybe to make the defense think a little bit more about who's getting the ball and which one's the halfback, which one's the fullback, that kind of thing. But I think once you get an understanding of it, like most offenses, the complexities start to fall off. And once you get the big picture, it's like, okay, it makes more sense. And if there's an assigned running back to who's going to be this running back, let's call it running back number one and running back number two. If every time you're in on the field, you're always running back number one, and every time the other players on the field is running back number two, that eliminates some confusion. But I can imagine that if you're going back and forth between one and two, there is a little bit of a chance for confusion. But that's not always a bad thing. You want some complexity to your offense. You want some things that are unique to your style and your system. Because it has more pros than cons at the end of the day. Because if it's complicated to you, one who's learned the playbook, who has access to the playbook, then imagine what the defense is going through and the game week planning and prepping for that offense. It's a little bit harder to get a beat on any tendencies or any similarities that they have to system they've seen in the past. It's really hard to get film on a system that's as young as the go-go offense is, especially as new as it is to UNLV. There's a lot of teams in conference that UNLV is going to face that haven't seen this offense before, and are going to have to compile data and film from Coach Marion's previous stops to try to get a beat on what's going on exactly. And that I think plays more of an advantage than anything. So the complexities will, I think, fade away the more they get into the playbook.
Caleb Herring, Steve Cofield, UNLV All Access Podcast. So there's a lot on the shoulders of Courtney Reese, one of the holdovers who actually got a good amount of action last year, is the most experienced guy with this program. I wonder what it's going to be like for him. Talking to Cornell Ford, I mentioned Reese having to learn now a third offense. Sanchez ran something different than we talked a lot last couple of years about Arroyo and the pistol. And Charles Williams had to learn and adjust to that offense. But Courtney Reese got some time last year, and now he's got to go into the go-go. Here's Cornell Ford talking about Courtney Reese and what his responsibilities are going to be.
Yeah, it's always tough when you're thrown into a new system. It's new terminology you have to learn, new formations, and obviously there's some things that he probably has to do that he hasn't had to do before, and the ones blocking, and then we're putting a lot of on his plate as well as him being able to catch the ball out of the backfield. So that's tough anytime, but he's an experienced guy, so he's putting the time in. He's got to put the time in studying and getting in and watching video and learning the offense as much as possible. And I think some of the things that we're doing this summer with the guys gives him that ability, so that by the time we get to week one, he should know what's going on. He's had a great opportunity now. He's seen it in the spring, all through spring ball, and then as we're working it right now, and we're basically starting the whole system all over again. So we just got done with the month of June, and we're going to crank it up and do all those reps all over again in July, so that by the time we get to August, he's pretty much got the offense down.
So there's new running backs coach for UNLV, Cornell Ford, talking about Courtney Reese. This offense would seem to be ready-made for Courtney Reese, but you never know. You never know how a running back is going to adjust to a new offense. What do you think is on the shoulders and in the head of Courtney Reese as he tries to blend in here? I mean, this is, one of the final chances. He's got to get it done, and he's going to have some competition.
Yeah, I think he's going to be hungry, right? I think there's a sense of urgency that he's going to have, and I think that he always has. He just hasn't really gotten the breakout year that he has maybe been searching for, maybe that he's capable of. We saw it, a glimpse of it against Notre Dame, the big play potential that he brings last season. And that's kind of what they're looking for in this offense. And I think what maybe attracts the coaching staff to keeping him around and wanting him to be as productive as he can in the system. And now, obviously, the learning curve is going to be different. And I talked about it in the eyes of a quarterback, how difficult it is to change and learn multiple new systems during the course of your college career. It's been, 4 years, and there's been, multiple different coaching staffs. One of the more complicated offenses by, testimony of the quarterbacks last season with Coach Arroyo. So that same sentiment applies to the running back room, right? They're learning a completely new language too. And some might say that outside of the center, the running backs, depending on what kind of offensive scheme you're running, the running backs have just as much to learn as the quarterbacks, right? Because they're involved in every aspect of the game, whether it's the run game, the protection game, or the passing game. The running backs pretty much touch every area depending on how involved each offense wants them to be. But Courtney Reese is definitely one that is capable of being explosive in the running game. He's capable of making plays out of the backfield in space. One of the question marks for him is going to be how viable he is as a blocking running back. Obviously, the size is going to play a factor there. You're not going to really put him in heavy protection schemes, but you're going to have to block. That's just a part of the game. You're going to have to be able to block. Otherwise, it's a big-time tendency key for defenses. If every time Courtney Reese is on the field, he's not going to be in the protection. He's either going to be getting the ball or running a route. So he's going to have to block, right? There's no way around it in today's football game. Is you're going to have to be able to block as a running back. But he's definitely up against it. His big play capability is going to be something they're going to be looking for, and he's going to be having to produce, especially if this version of the go-go is going to be as up-tempo maybe as it could be. We didn't see a lot of tempo during the spring game, but that's probably because the comfortability with the offense wasn't there. They probably weren't as sure that the guys could handle it. But as any offense with tempo has, they're going to have a requirement for depth, right? And there's already two running backs on the field at a time. So if you're going up tempo and the fatigue start to become a factor, you're going to be looking to your depth chart a little bit more than the traditional offense. So that leaves room for everybody on the depth chart, but especially for Courtney Reese to make a mark for themselves, maybe get more reps than they would have, even if they don't end up number 1 or 2 on the depth chart. They may be looking farther down the depth chart in the running game for their running back production throughout the season. So it's a big year for Courtney. I'm excited for him. He's one of the guys that I've always watched and wanted to see in space and get a chance to make explosive plays. You hear it on the broadcast a lot. I don't want to say I'm a fan because I try not to be biased like guys, but he's definitely a guy that I keep an eye on as far as what he can do on the field. He has the potential to be electric, and hopefully this year is a breakout year for him in this offense in particular, where the running back is such a heavy feature. Hopefully he's able to thrive on that.
Is the go-go more ideal for small running backs? Because we'll talk about some of the newcomers here in a second and some of the 2024 commits, because they had this large collection of small dudes. Who is it ideal for, the big back or the small back?
I would lean towards the small back, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. I think schematically there's a lot of deception involved, and I think a smaller back maybe is better for that. I think there's a lot of change of direction in the backfield, especially when there's misdirection with handoffs and things like that. I would venture to say that smaller backs are just more physically capable of that kind of change of direction and change of pace in the backfield. There's not a lot of straight line downhill running There may be some, but I think there's more lateral movement than traditional offenses, especially when you're talking about I formation or even the pistol, where there's a more downhill nature to it. I think more of the running backs in this go-go offense are offset. So I would say, just the physical capabilities of a smaller back are naturally a part of this offense. Not saying that bigger backs can't do it, but I think it would be more tailored to a smaller running back. I think that of most shotgun-oriented offenses, right, when the run game is happening from the shotgun, especially the offset running back, I think there's naturally a lateral quickness that's required of the running back, and more smaller backs have that than bigger backs. So I would say, I think the smaller backs definitely have an advantage in this offense. And it's the backfield, especially in the spring, was loaded with smaller running backs. And Courtney Reese is one of those guys who's smaller by height and by weight. But the shiftiness, again, is a part of his skill set, and usually is a part of the smaller running back skill set. Hopefully that pays dividends. And hopefully that is the case, because, we definitely have some smaller running backs that could have potential should they get on the field and get their opportunities.
The other holdovers are a former JUCO walk-on in Andrew Wimmer. Jordan Young-Humphrey is back. He's also a walk-on, a guy who played at Stetson, and a Florida guy. The newcomers, so they got a big back in Donovan Lester, who's 6'2" and 210. What do you think of him? We haven't really had a chance to see him, but based on his rep, they wanted at least one big back, and he fills that role.
Yeah, he's the biggest of the backs, 210, 6'2". So that you can assume short yardage situations or any situation like that, he's probably going to be the guy handed off the ball if that's the way they decide to handle those situations. But I would say he's got top end speed, though, which is not to shake the head off of anybody, but there's times, even with Courtney Reese, when he broke out into the open field where maybe that back end speed wasn't there, but this guy Donovan Lester has it. Just the small sample size we have on him at film, he has the speed to take it the distance. He's a strider. And I would compare his running style, if just for a professional comparison, just looking at him run, because of the pad level that he runs with. This is a Hall of Fame guy. But Dickerson, playing with the Rams, I was a Rams fan growing up, so playing with the Rams, and Eric Dickerson was one of those guys who had kind of a higher pad height when he was running, and people would probably traditionally say, get your pads down there, you're going to get blown up going through the middle. But this guy's the same style of runner where he's not necessarily low to the ground. His pad height is not low. He's not dropping his pads too much. He's kind of upright when he's running. But another thing about that, he doesn't really break his stride as he's approaching the line of scrimmage. And he presses the hole, I think, aggressively and with high speed and velocity. Even though he's not the quick, choppy, jump cut guy in the backfield, he's able to hit the line of scrimmage with kind of a full steam ahead. And that's even from the shotgun position. You've seen him on film in the pistol and the shotgun, sometimes even in the single back from under center. But he has the same running style in any of those scenarios where he's hitting the ground and hitting the hole without breaking stride. And that probably contributes to why at the top end of his running of his big plays that he's able to break away from some of the defenders and have that really open up stride down the field. So he's a unique back. He's different than the backs that you have, and I think that's actually good. It's a good thing to have some variety in your running back depth chart, because if everybody looks exactly the same, then you're kind of limited to what you can do. I think he's a downhill runner. He's bigger. He's strong, but he then has top end speed to make those big plays. He has a couple of 50-plus yard runs on his highlight reel. So he's going to be an interesting addition. I'm glad he's there to add some depth and size to the running back room. And we'll see what he's able to produce in the fall, how quickly he's able to get up to speed, because he didn't have spring like some of the other guys that the holdovers had to get used to the offense. Hopefully this summer months and going into fall, he's able to get up to speed as quickly as possible.
He's from William & Mary, a Pitt transfer who got pretty good action for the Panthers over the years. Small guy out of Lauderdale in Florida is Vincent Davis. I would assume some similarities to Courtney Reese. So he's got a chance here in his final year, his grad transfer year, to get some playing time.
Yeah, he is more similar to Courtney Reese, and I talked about it with the jump cuts and the lateral movement and quickness that some of the running backs out of the shotgun have. Vincent Davis, or VD as they're calling him already, he's bringing that nickname over from Pitt with him. But he's got some of that jump cut quickness to make people miss in the backfield early in the runs. Now, he does have some speed at the back end. I wouldn't say, and you'd have to have him run 40s. They'll probably have some words exchanged, some competition exchange over this, but I wouldn't say he has a top end speed of Lester. But he's just as quick, if not quicker, inside of the tackle boxes. So he's able to make people miss. And he got a lot of playing time at Pitt, like you mentioned. His freshman season already got a lot of minutes, logged a lot of minutes as a freshman back at Pitt when he first started. Had an over 200-yard game against Georgia Tech under his belt against Pittsburgh, when he was at Pittsburgh, rather. So that's just to put a kind of a perception of what he's capable of. He's capable of going for the big yardage games and got a lot of playing time, a lot of experience under his belt while he was at Pitt, and bringing that experience with him to this running back room. I'm sure he has, the senior leadership presence about him in that running back room where he's able to kind of take command of it. Hopefully learning the system and learning the offense, that experience and that maturity helps him as well. But I think he's a shifty back, and he's a good complement to what we brought in with Donovan Lester, rather, because they are not the same. They're not the same style of running back, but the shiftiness of Davis, I think, is going to come in handy, especially in this offense. He's just like Courtney Reese in that regard. Maybe Courtney's a little bit more agile and a little bit more dangerous in open space as far as making guys miss. But Vincent Davis, what he doesn't have in that category, and what Courtney maybe has him outpaced in that category, Vincent Davis also has the strength element of it. You see him a couple of times breaking numerous tackles on individual runs and lowering the helmet and getting some extra yardage at the end. I don't think Courtney's quite capable of that because of the size difference, but Vincent Davis brings kind of the thunder and lightning in one compact bottle, I guess, if you want to put it that way. And he's able to do both. So we'll see if he's able to add that. Again, coming in the fall, doesn't have the experience with the playbook that some of the other guys have. But he's going to be quickly brought up to speed. I'm sure he's going to be one of the guys that is looked at to contribute, whether it's in the ones and twos offensively or right away in the special teams, because we know how seriously Coach Odom and his staff take special teams. So a lot of these guys, even if they're not number one on the depth chart, will make their mark on the special teams unit.
Talking about the running back room as we get you ready for the 2023 season of UNLV football. They've also got two freshmen coming in, true freshmen, recruited out of high school, in Jet Thomas out of Atlanta, out of Kansas City, DJ Jones. Here's Cornell Ford, the running back coach, talking about the possibility that freshmen get on the field this year.
With all these guys, I've told them all the same thing. Hey, if you can't block, you can't play. So I don't care if he's a senior or he's a freshman.
Yeah.
If you ain't blocking, you ain't playing. That's my motto. Now, the freshmen, it's always difficult for them because, they've only been here for a few weeks, and we're cramming a lot in their little, melons and trying to get them to learn this thing as quickly as possible. And basically it's just trying to find out, is there one that's mature enough? He might not be quite up to snuff right now, but by August, can you see some potential where he might be able to, if he catches up, can he go out and make some plays for us and be special with the ball in his hands? And obviously you got to be tough enough to, stick your face in and block the people. And so that's kind of what we're finding out. Obviously we're doing it right now without pads, but you're just trying to figure out, is there one that might be special enough that he might be able to get in the rotation?
Running backs to play have to be able to block, as Coach Ford said. You're a former quarterback. Elaborate on this.
Yeah, so teams are going to blitz, right? You can account for the normal rush with your offensive lineman. That's fine. But in blitz protection, which is, basically every third down these days, depending on who you're playing, some teams it's every down. They're bringing additional pressure. So as a quarterback, you have to have complete trust. Not only that they're going to understand their assignment, but that they're going to be able to carry out the assignment, right? Like, it's one thing to know where you're supposed to go, but then you have to have a willingness and the capability to go out and execute it. And that's more often than not blocking guys who are coming at high speeds, who have a lot of space between you and them. So it's a very difficult task to be able to block as a running back. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't really account for. Offensive linemen, I don't want to say they have it easy because it's tough up there in the trenches, but their guys don't have a full head of speed. There's not a lot of space to make different moves. You kind of got one way to go, and that's it. It's strength, it's bull rush, and that's pretty much what you got to worry about as an offensive lineman. But as a running back, when you're a part of the protection scheme, usually you're picking up somebody that's coming from depth, right? You got a linebacker coming from the second level, or a safety or a corner coming from the edge, and there's a lot of space and a lot of momentum behind where they're coming. And you look at some of the running backs taking on blitzes, you kind of feel bad for them sometimes because they're just standing there waiting for a guy coming full speed at them to kind of absorb the blow, really, and just get in the way at sometimes. But it's important. It's an important part of any pass game to understand not only that that's your job, but to be able to stand in there and take it a lot of times. It's something that a lot of running backs don't appreciate early in their careers, especially coming out of high school. You're not asked to do it much. So then getting into the college game where you become a part of the protection, sometimes you're the sixth lineman on the field and you have to do your job. Otherwise, the quarterback's going to get crushed or the pass game's just not going to work. That's a big part of getting on the field. And if you show a willingness to do that early, we talked about receivers being able to do it, but running backs as well, especially running backs being able to show that you're capable of blocking. Sometimes there's a difference between playing time and no playing time. So it's an important factor. And also adding to that, the next level of it is understanding how you can manipulate defenses based on whether or not you're running a route or staying in protection, right? The green dog blitzes that you'll see a lot of teams do nowadays on defense, where they watch the running back. If he stays in protection, then another guy blitzes. But if a running back goes out on a route, then that player becomes a man-to-man defender. And understanding things like that and the nuances of defense when it comes to protection, I think give running backs an edge, especially when they're fighting in a crowded running back room for minutes on the field. Being a good blocker is how you get on the field. And Chad Magyar was one of those guys who was able to be a blocking running back, and because of that, saw himself getting some minutes and maybe more than he would have. Then on top of that, on special teams, a lot of the times you're going to be required to block, and you could be the difference maker on a big special teams play in the return game. Based on your ability to be a blocking back. So it's an avenue to minutes, and there's stories like Terrell Davis where special teams and making those kinds of plays led to Hall of Fame careers and led to minutes and led to roster spots. It could be the same thing in college football, right? You get on the field because you're a great, tenacious blocker, and all of a sudden you find yourself in the rotation, and now you get more handoffs your way because the coaches are appreciating that effort. Everybody knows it, understands it, especially the offensive linemen. They appreciate it. They appreciate the help. And then your quarterback has trust in you. And that goes a long way when you're talking about getting minutes on the field as a running back. Young running backs have to grasp that quickly. And I think that's one of the keys for freshmen is to get in and understand it's going to be dirty. You're going to have to put your face in there and block, take on some blitzing backers just to make a difference on the team. And that's going to be your niche maybe as a young running back. So get used to it.
Caleb Herring, Steve Cofield. In addition to the UNLV All Access podcast, we're on the games, but we also are part of the Barry Odom radio show. We did the Marcus Arroyo radio show, which I thought was actually pretty informational, entertaining show. And, to remind people who don't listen to the show on a regular basis, one, it is a live show this year, 99% sure. It's going to be Wednesdays at 6 o'clock at Parkway Tavern at 215 in Flamingo. We'll not move locations. We rotated in the past, but this year we'll be at that location. There's a lot of stuff. If we do our job and make the coach and coaches comfortable, there's a lot of inside stuff, really good hardcore football talk, personnel stuff that comes out on that show. So the first show is tentatively scheduled for August 30th, Barry Odom radio show. That'll be at Parkway Tavern, 215 and Flamingo. And you and I both love doing that show because, like I just said, really good hardcore football talk. Until pen goes to paper and official letters are signed, the coaches cannot talk about the 2024 class. They can kind of make reference to it, and you've seen that in some tweets. This class has some excitement in it because at running back, I think they've achieved at a high level. So they landed Devin Green about 3 weeks ago. He's a 3-star running back out of Sacramento who was offered by sort of local, I know it's a little bit of ways, but sort of local Fresno State, which has a tremendous tradition when it comes to producing running backs. Reno also offered, but in the Pac-12, Devin Green was offered by Cal, Arizona, and Washington State. So this is a really nice win for UNLV. And then the other thing the staff talked about, Caleb, was repairing, and they didn't use these words, but repairing, restoring, and building relationships with the local high schools. So far, unofficially, they've landed 4 local recruits, but they landed a really good name. And, those skill positions is where they really need to make some waves locally. Greg Burrell has been around the program a lot. He's a Desert Pines running back, good-sized kid, 6'1", 205, and he was offered by several schools in the Mountain West Conference in CSU and Reno, and also by BYU. And don't forget that BYU has taken backs straight out of high school in Vegas. They just nabbed Aiden Robbins using their resources, which, hey, that's a deal now. That's NIL. If you got NIL for the entire team and you can really boost it for guys that you can steal off of other rosters, well, Aiden Robbins chose to go to BYU. So Greg Burrell turning them down is a big deal. And this is a good one. This is a big one. And I think it sends a message to kids who are 3 stars, but especially bordering on 4 stars, that they can stay home and they're going to go to a good school with unreal facilities.
Yeah, it's huge. I think especially in recent years, we've seen Reno in particular steal a couple of Las Vegas kids and take them up north. and they've been standout players for Reno. So it's good. That's just number one. As a former Rebel, beating Reno out at anything is always special to me. It's always cool. But this is, and I'll say this from personal experience. This is the first time I go to a barbershop here in town, and it's, the original barbershop was the name of it, and I go there, and there's always good conversation in the shop, whether it's sports talk, whatever the conversation ends up being. With Raiders in town, it's like a small little podcast that goes on every time I'm in there. And very rarely in the past was the conversation UNLV football. The last time I went to get my haircut there, Greg Burrell's name came up, and he was one of the topics of conversation. And guys in the barbershop were saying how he's probably the best running back in the state, yada, yada, yada. It's great that he's at UNLV, and UNLV's landed some major recruits. Basketball landed another local guy, and they're recruiting. So UNLV and their recruitment of Greg Burrell was mentioned in barbershop conversation. And that's a big deal. Like getting mentioned in shop talk is huge when you're talking about sports locally, especially with the competitive market that UNLV is facing now with the sports world. It's awesome that UNLV was brought up in conversation, and Greg Burrell being one of those guys. And again, it's nothing pen to paper yet, but just the fact that it's a commit that's out there on social media that the shop's talking about, the community's excited about, something's brewing, right? And it's different than we've been able to talk about in the past as far as these future commits now trending and leaning towards UNLV more often than it did in the past. It's a big win for UNLV to get that, not only that commit, but that conversation going in town, which would only lead to more future commits, especially if this season goes according to plan. The expectations have been set. It's not like we're looking at a rebuild here. They're looking to make impact immediately to solidify these commits for 2024, but also to dig a little deeper into the future and get maybe some more 3 and 4 local recruits out of Las Vegas, and then expand that net like they already have with this recruiting class all across the nation, reaching all over the place right now with this 2024 recruiting class. But those kind of conversations, that kind of excitement around a recruit, around UNLV recruiting in football, is just not something we've had in a long, long time. And I think Greg Burrell is one of the names that really brings that to the forefront, at least for me in my personal life. A lot of guys are from the community that I interact with, and they're excited about signings or commits like that for the future of UNLV football. Maybe getting more eyes out to Allegiant as well, as a result of some of these local guys landing at home and staying home at Allegiant Stadium.
And keep in mind, if the number is at 4 right now, I'm sure it's going to balloon up to, who knows, 6, 7, 8 by the time they're all done recruiting high school players early next year. Over the 3 real recruiting years for Marcus Arroyo, he landed at Haynes, who then stayed with the class. He's from Liberty. They landed Mayava, Noah McKinney, who's on to Oklahoma State, and Aaron Holloway. That was it. 4 guys in 3 years. I had a listener point out that technically Mayava and McKinney weren't even really local recruits because they came into the market a little bit later, but I'll count them as local recruits. So they got 4 in the Arroyo era, 21, 22, 23. They've got 4 right now, commits in early July, a year, really, 9 months before everything will be done with high school players. But I will point out, too, it is a crazy game. I just mentioned, Aiden Robbins being stolen off the roster, which BYU does all the time. Keep in mind, other schools don't stop recruiting guys. So I'm not saying, hey, Greg Burrell or his family, they're not to be relied upon, but they will. If he has a monster year, people will keep coming after him, until the pen is to paper. And I saw a report the other day that Damian McDaniel, the second highest rated recruit, kid out of Texas who can play defensive back and wide receiver, UNLV committed to have him playing wide receiver. Ole Miss and Oregon were going after him as a defensive back, and the report the other day was Oregon's still talking to him. You get a commit, you got to kind of keep massaging the situation, paying attention to the situation. And listen, folks, the game is dirtier than it's ever been. It's always been dirty. There's always been payments, but the respect for a verbal is non-existent. I mean, there's so much pressure on different coaching staffs at a lot of schools that they keep recruiting. So the hold this, now the number I think is 15, bordering on 16 verbals for 2024. A lot of these guys are highly recruited dudes. So other schools are going to keep coming, Caleb.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the downsides of getting such a head start, because sometimes when a guy verbally commits somewhere, that actually piques the interest of these bigger schools that maybe could come poach off of you, right? Like, so there's now more of a waiting period between now and signing day than maybe there would have been if you get a guy later. So a guy maybe, and again, not accusing anybody of this, but it's the right of a player to be able to do this, right? Somebody may verbal commit just to get that attention, or just to, kind of put it out there that, hey, I'm getting looks. I'm that guy. I'm already committed somewhere, and that maybe attracts somebody that they're more interested in. You have to worry about that as a coaching staff. Not just that, but then every year, essentially, this guy that you recruited, maybe with hopes of him being a future contributor, every year you have to re-recruit that guy in a sense, because the transfer portal is such a big thing going forward in the future. So it's not like it's done, maybe for that year it's done putting pen to paper, but the end of the season, if that player's not happy or not satisfied with the outcome, there's no winning involved in the program, no playing time, or whatever the case may be, the honeymoon phase ends for that player. It's very, very possible that they'll be entering the transfer portal again and be reopening the recruiting process all over again. So it's almost a year-round job now, not just to get players in, but to keep players on your roster that maybe you've penciled in at this point, but you hope to ink in for the long haul, especially if you're planning on, developing them and coaching them up for year 2 or 3 in their progression, them being a big-time player in your system. You need to be able to keep them and sustain and continue to recruit them for an extended period of time, not just while they're freshmen in high school.
Now, the positive to having 15 or 16 verbal commits, I think, is a cause and effect deal here. I'm guessing a lot of families, high school families, the kids coming out of high school are looking around the last couple of years, and the numbers are there. Not as many high school kids are getting scholarships. It's basically turned into this new system because the transfer portal kids are taking away opportunities from potential freshmen. So a lot of kids aren't getting scholarship offers, and it looks to me like a lot of them and the families are like, hey, let's take the best offer we like, and we sign in December, because we don't want to be left in February and early March looking around and like all the chairs are filled. The portal, with all the desire to get old and stay old, has really hurt the freshmen. And now we've got a whole system of kids landing at FCS and lower and having to go, I'm going to go there. I might not be on scholarship, but I'm going to have to work my way up the chain, and then maybe I get the look in the transfer portal down the road. It's a weird vibe right now.
Yeah, and I look back to my own personal experience, and I say, I was one of those guys who, at the quarterback position, where scholarships were going left and right, and it was early for quarterbacks back then. My junior year, I was committed to UNLV, but I felt like I was behind in that sense, because a lot of other quarterbacks had already committed before their junior seasons. So it was one of those things where it's like, hey, let's just find somewhere to commit to. Let's make sure we got something secured before we're left out in the wind. That could very well be the case, and it's a cause and effect thing, right? Because with the demand for coaches to turn programs around quickly, the coaching carousel has kind of always been a thing, but it seems like there's a tighter and tighter leash on coaches to turn a program around and to get to winning quickly when they are hired as a new hire of a coach. Because of that, they look for quick answers. And the quick answers with the transfer portal opening up is to go to JUCO guys, the guys from other colleges who already have college experiences, and not necessarily go to a freshman to build up, because you don't have time to wait. You don't have time to look 2-3 years down the road, because your job's on the line, right? So you're going to the transfer portal a lot. And this is one of the things where I think the side effect, or the consequence of having that inline thinking with the athletic director, head coach of football, and so on and so forth, and the president, even throw them into that chain of command, especially because they're the ones at the end of the day signing the checks. But when you go through that succession, everybody's on the same page as far as what the expectations are. You have a freedom then to recruit guys based on that building steps. And now you have a bigger freshman class, because you have the understanding and the support of the administration that, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is what I'm in line with. And you accept that. So now I have the faith or the trust of the staff to go after the high school guys. And recruits now can look at the situation. They look at it, and it feels like consistency. It feels good to have guys recruiting out of high school, right? But it feels like a stable program when you have that inline thinking. And imagine the guys that are, I don't want to say tenured, because there's no such thing in college football, but if a coach is tenured and he's cemented in that place, you feel more confident as a high school recruit committing there. A high school recruit is more secure committing to Nick Saban, because he knows that Nick Saban's going to be there in 3 or 4 years. He's not going anywhere unless he chooses to, right? And not a lot of coaches can say that. Not a lot of coaches have that, to be able to say, I'm going to be here in 3 or 4 years. Trust me, we have a consistent program here. And UNLV especially hasn't had that for years, decades, where it seemed like the athletic director, the president, and the head coach of football were all on the same page as far as the consistent messaging throughout the program. I think UNLV has struck that balance right now, and it's evident in the way that they're recruiting because they're able to go after high school guys and say, hey, this is going to be the program. You're going to be a part of that program. We're going to build up with you, and we're going to be committed to you at this program just as you are to us. Now, again, that could all change, but right now the perception for UNLV football is they're in step as a program, as a Division I football organization, athletic department included. We're all on the same page as far as what the goal is and how we can accomplish that. And it looks like that's going to be the case going forward. And parents and recruits alike can see that and sense that feeling during the recruitment process, because you can only sell so much to a recruit in their living room. There's some things that have to be true and evident through the program. And I think that consistency from top to bottom is becoming evident for UNLV football.
Grab your season tickets now. The season begins at home at Allegiant on September 2nd. The home slate is Bryant, then Vanderbilt, Hawaii, Colorado State, Wyoming. Man, I would love to see physically UNLV to match up against Wyoming and do well because they've had a tough time in the past. And then, weird rivalry, even though Arroyo's gone, Brent Brennan is still at San Jose State, and San Jose State has been a thorn in the Rebel side. And the way they play, we've talked about in the past, although Fehoko and his nut scrape is gone. He's off to the NFL. So some of their good players have moved on, but they're very good at quarterback. But anyway, that's the final home game. If you get your season tickets, they're anywhere between $150 up to $500 for a season ticket package. You get 6 games. If you do it before August 1st, they actually are giving away UNLV branded Yeti cups. I love my Yeti cups. I have a bunch of them, so good stuff there. So go to UNLVtickets.com, grab your season tickets. It's going to be a hot ticket this year, and Allegiant is a beautiful stadium to watch football, and there isn't a bad seat in the house. Caleb, appreciate it. We're back next week, but there you go. There's the breakdown of the running backs room, and we'll figure out a position next week to break down. A lot to get to, a lot of new players. Thanks for listening. Spread the word. We do this every week, the UNLV All Access Podcast.